By the time the venue owner in Positano tried running the catering balance a third time on the morning of the wedding, my sister's new husband had already gone through 4 different explanations for why the card kept declining, none of which happened to be the true one. I was 2 countries away by then, sitting on a terrace in Switzerland with a coffee I hadn't had to transfer a single reward point to pay for, reading his increasingly frantic texts with the specific, unhurried calm of a woman who had already done all her math the night before. Before I explain how I ended up on that terrace instead of at my own sister's wedding, hit subscribe and turn on your notifications, because you'll want to see exactly what a hot microphone can cost a person. Tell me in the comments, have you ever found out what someone really thought of you at the worst possible moment for them? Welcome to Revenge Stories Narrated, where family betrayal meets inevitable justice and karma always collects its debt. My name is Marceline. I'm 41, unmarried, and I built a skincare company from a rented commercial kitchen 14 years ago into something that now funds a life most people in my family have quietly decided to resent me for, in the specific, backhanded way families sometimes resent the one person who actually made something of the opportunities everyone else complained about not having. My younger sister, Bianca, is 32, engaged for most of the past 2 years to a pleasant, mostly harmless man named Tobias, and when she asked me to help fund their wedding in Italy, I said yes almost immediately, the way I've said yes to most requests from my family for longer than was probably good for me. The wedding ended up costing just over $40,000, all of it booked under my name, my credit card, my hotel rewards account accumulated over a decade of business travel, because Bianca and Tobias's own finances didn't come close to covering a villa outside Positano, a caterer with a 2-year waitlist, and enough flights for both families to make the trip properly. I didn't mind paying for most of it. What I minded, though I didn't fully understand this until later, was how quickly helping turned into an assumption, the specific, quiet shift where a gift stops being treated as a gift and starts being treated as an obligation you simply hadn't finished paying yet. The comments had been building for years before that wedding, in ways I'd mostly learned to let slide. At a family dinner 2 Christmases ago, my mother described my company, in front of relatives, as Marceline's little hobby that got lucky. A sentence that managed to erase 14 years of 80-hour weeks in 11 words. Bianca had a habit, going back to childhood, of describing my life as easier because I didn't have kids, a comment that ignored, conveniently, that I'd spent most of my 30s building something specifically so that nobody in my family would ever have to worry about money again, an intention that had apparently translated, somewhere along the way, into an assumption that my money existed for exactly that purpose. I'd covered a down payment for my parents' roof 3 years earlier, quietly, without ever mentioning it at family gatherings, because I didn't want it treated as a topic of conversation, only to hear Bianca reference it once at a dinner as evidence that I clearly had money to burn, a framing I found difficult to reconcile with how carefully I'd tried to keep the whole thing private in the first place. I'd started, somewhere around that same year, keeping a quiet mental tally of moments like that one, not out of bitterness exactly, more out of the specific, tired habit of a person who has learned that generosity, in certain families, gets recorded differently depending on who benefits from forgetting the terms of it later. The rehearsal dinner was held on the villa's terrace, string lights, a small band, roughly 60 guests between both families. Bianca had insisted on a microphone for the toasts, wanting the moment recorded properly for the wedding videographer. What none of us realized, including apparently Bianca herself, was that the microphone stayed live for several minutes after her formal toast ended, feeding directly into the small speaker system near the bar, while she stepped a few feet away to talk quietly with 2 of her bridesmaids. I heard my own name first, then the word spinster, delivered with a small, easy laugh I recognized from a lifetime of family gatherings. She told her bridesmaids, in a voice that carried clearly across a terrace gone unexpectedly quiet, that I was a pathetic spinster who just bought their love because I didn't have anything else in my life worth spending money on, and that Tobias's parents shouldn't feel bad about the wedding's costs since I'd have nothing better to do with the money anyway. A few relatives laughed, uncertainly, before realizing how many people could actually hear it. I sat perfectly still at my table, watching my mother's face carefully avoid mine, watching Tobias's father glance toward me, and then quickly away. If you've ever found out exactly what someone thought of you, broadcast to a room full of people who then pretended not to have heard it, hit like right now. I'd love to know in the comments if you've ever kept your composure in a moment when you had every reason not to. I finished my dinner. I complimented the caterer on the branzino, which was genuinely excellent, and I left a little after 10, telling the table nearest me, pleasantly, that I had an early morning ahead of me, which was, in its own way, entirely true. Nobody stopped me at the door. I'm not sure anyone at that table fully understood yet what an early morning was going to mean for them. Back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and went through every booking associated with that wedding methodically, the way I approach most decisions, without much drama attached to the process itself. The return flights for the newlyweds, booked as a surprise upgrade to business class under my rewards account 2 months earlier, canceled within minutes, the miles redeposited automatically into my own account. The honeymoon suite at a resort on the Amalfi Coast, booked and paid in full through my corporate travel portal, canceled with a small penalty I found entirely worth it. The remaining balance owed to the caterer, due in full the following morning per their contract, sat on my card as an authorized but not yet finalized charge, and I simply removed my card from the vendor's file entirely, a 5-minute process the villa's own booking system made remarkably easy. I had one flight left to deal with, my own return ticket home, booked for 2 days after the wedding to allow for recovery time neither of us apparently needed anymore. I changed the destination instead of canceling it outright, rerouting myself to a resort in the Swiss Alps I'd been meaning to visit for years and had simply never made time for, using points that, as of that dinner, I no longer felt any obligation to save for anyone's benefit but my own. I left the villa before 6 the next morning, before anyone else in either family was awake, my own bags already packed the night before out of the same instinct that had packed several other things by then. By the time the caterer attempted to run the remaining balance around 9, per their standard morning of protocol, the card on file no longer existed. By the time Tobias's parents tried to check on the honeymoon suite reservation to confirm the surprise upgrade they knew was coming, the booking had vanished entirely. By the time the newlyweds' actual return flights came up for check-in review, there was no reservation left to check in for at all. I found out the rest secondhand, mostly through a flurry of texts I let sit unanswered for most of the day. Tobias spent the morning of his own wedding on the phone with 3 different vendors trying to explain declining charges he didn't have the authority or the funds to cover himself. My mother called 4 times, then sent a message asking, with a kind of wounded confusion I found difficult to take entirely seriously, why I would do something so drastic over a joke that got a little out of hand. Bianca didn't call at all that first day, which told me more than any message she eventually did send. The wedding itself apparently still happened, in a scaled-back version, the caterer agreeing to a reduced menu paid partially by Tobias's parents on the spot and partially, I'm told, by a hastily arranged loan from a family friend. The honeymoon didn't happen as planned. Bianca and Tobias spent their first nights as a married couple in the same villa they'd already paid the deposit on, sorting out logistics instead of celebrating, which struck me, when I finally heard the details, as a fairly proportionate use of their first week together. I spent 4 days in Switzerland, mostly alone, walking longer distances than I had in years, eating dinner at a small restaurant with a view I didn't have to share with anyone who'd ever called me pathetic for enjoying my own company. I bought myself a watch on the second day, nothing extravagant but the kind of small, deliberate purchase that felt entirely different from every other check I'd written that month. Bianca sent an apology eventually, 3 weeks later, careful and clearly drafted with help, acknowledging what she'd said without quite acknowledging why it had taken an entire ruined wedding morning to prompt the acknowledgement. I accepted it, cautiously, the way you accept things you're not yet sure you fully believe. I still see my family at occasional gatherings, though the dynamic has shifted in ways that took a while to settle into. Nobody has asked me to fund anything since. I don't know if that's growth or simply caution, and honestly, at this point I've stopped needing it to be the former in order to feel like the terrace in Switzerland was worth every point I spent getting there. If you've ever found out what family really thought of your generosity, right before you decided exactly how generous you were willing to keep being, tell me about it in the comments. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next.